Tonight's stories remind us that sometimes what we hear isn't always what it seems. A scream that wasn't human. Dogs that refused to enter a room for reasons no one could explain. And a locked door that should have stayed shut forever. Turn down the lights and listen closely, because these three tales will make you question what's real and what's still hiding in the dark. It started around 8 p.m. on a Tuesday. I was washing dishes when I heard it, a sharp, muffled scream coming from the house next door. At first, I thought it was the TV. People argue all the time in this neighborhood. But then came another scream, louder, clearer. A woman's voice, shrill and desperate, begging for help. The house belonged to my neighbor, Mr. Dalton. He was a quiet man in his late 40s, lived alone, never really talked to anyone. His lawn was always trimmed, his blinds always shut. He left for work early every morning in his white pickup and came back after dark. That night, though, the lights in his house flickered on and off. The screaming stopped, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The next morning, I saw him as usual, walking to his truck in that same beige jacket. He waved to me with a faint smile like nothing had happened. I wanted to ask him about the noise, but lost my nerve. Over the next week, the screams came back. Not every night, just often enough to keep me on edge. Sometimes I'd hear crying, sometimes muffled shouting. Once, I thought I heard someone pounding on a wall. I told myself it had to be my imagination. Maybe he was watching horror movies. Maybe he had guests. But I never saw anyone enter or leave his house. One night, curiosity got the better of me. I crept into my backyard and tried to peek through his windows. They were all covered, curtains drawn tight. But I caught something in the reflection of the glass, a faint movement, like a shadow passing behind the light. The screaming started again. I froze, heart pounding. It was definitely coming from inside. The next morning, I finally went over there. He opened the door after a long pause, looking tired and irritated. "Morning," I said, trying to sound casual. "Hey, everything okay over here? I've been hearing some yelling lately." He frowned. "Yelling? There's nobody here but me." He said it flatly, but his eyes lingered on mine just a little too long, like he was daring me to push further. I laughed awkwardly and apologized for bothering him. That night I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house sounded like footsteps next door. Around midnight, I picked up the phone and called the non-emergency police line. I told them I thought my neighbor might be hurting someone. 2 officers arrived within minutes. I watched through my blinds as they knocked, talked to him, and eventually went inside. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped my phone. I waited for them to drag out a terrified woman. But instead, after about 10 minutes, the officers came out laughing. Mr. Dalton followed behind them, smiling. One of the officers gestured toward me, and they all started walking to my yard. My stomach dropped. "Sir," one of them said politely, "you're the one who called?" I nodded. He pointed toward the open window of Mr. Dalton's living room. Sitting on a tall perch was a massive scarlet macaw. Bright red feathers, black eyes that seemed far too intelligent. Before I could process it, the bird looked right at me and screamed. "Help me, please, somebody help." I nearly stumbled backward. The officer laughed softly. "That's your victim. Parrot's a rescue, picked up all kinds of sounds from its last owners." Mr. Dalton chuckled. "She's got quite the vocabulary." I muttered an apology and went back inside, embarrassed and shaken. But later that night, when the lights went out, I heard it again. The same voice, same words, only this time, it wasn't coming from next door. It was coming from inside my own living room. When I was 13, my parents finished the basement and said it would be my new room. They called it more space. I called it exile. The first night, I brought my dog Rufus downstairs with me. He followed halfway down the steps before stopping dead. His ears perked up, tail tucked tight between his legs. He whimpered once, then turned and bolted upstairs. I laughed it off. Maybe the air smelled weird or the pipes made a sound. But after that, he refused to come down again. Every time I tried to coax him, he'd plant his feet and whine. After a few weeks, I gave up and slept alone. That's when I started hearing things. Faint thuds, a soft shuffle near the walls. Once or twice, a tapping noise under the floorboards, like someone flicking the wood from below. My dad said it was the foundation settling. My mom said maybe it was rats. But I noticed something else. Every time the noises happened, the temperature dropped. Fast forward 2 years. Rufus had passed, and we got another dog, Bailey, a big golden retriever. He was braver, louder, and friendlier. The first night I brought him downstairs, I expected him to nap right beside me. He didn't. He froze halfway down the steps, growled low, and stared at the far corner of my room. That corner, always the same one. A shadowed patch of wall that seemed darker than the rest of the basement, even with the lights on. Bailey barked once, loud enough to make me jump, then backed up, teeth bared. Nothing there, just cold air. I tried ignoring it, but over the next few months, strange things started happening. My books would be on the floor in the morning. My phone charger would be unplugged. Sometimes I'd wake up to find the closet door open, even though I'd locked it shut before bed. One night I heard something breathing next to my bed. Slow. When I turned on the lamp, the air felt thick, like something had just moved. Bailey was upstairs barking hysterically. The next day, I told my dad, and he agreed to check behind the wall. He pulled off the wooden paneling and found a narrow crawl space filled with dust and insulation. And inside, near the corner where Bailey had been growling, was a single child's shoe, old, faded, half-buried. My mom went pale when she saw it. She told us the house had been built over the remains of an older property, one that burned down decades ago. No one knew if anyone had died in it. We sealed the wall back up that same day. But sometimes, even now, when I visit home, Bailey still refuses to go near that door. And if you listen carefully at night, you can still hear the faint sound of something moving just beneath the floor. When my grandmother passed away, she left me her house. It was small and quiet, sitting on the edge of town, surrounded by overgrown trees and an old wooden fence. I'd spent a few summers there as a kid. I remembered how the house always smelled faintly of lavender and dust, and how Grandma used to hum to herself while cooking. But there was one thing she never let anyone do: open the door at the end of the hallway. She called it the sewing room, said it was just for her projects. But I never once saw her sew. When I moved in, the house was mostly empty except for her furniture and a few boxes. Everything was clean, except that room. The door was locked, the key long gone. The first few nights were quiet. Then, around 2 a.m. on the fourth night, I woke up to a faint humming sound. It was soft and rhythmic, like a lullaby coming from down the hall. It sounded exactly like Grandma's humming. The next morning, I told myself it was wind through the vents. But the following night, it happened again. And again after that, always at 2 a.m. Finally, I decided to open the door. The lock was old, so I wedged a screwdriver under the knob and forced it open. The air that spilled out was cold, dry, and stale, the kind that hasn't moved in years. Inside was a small room lit only by the moonlight through a thin curtain. There was a single rocking chair in the center, facing the wall, and scratched into the paint beside it were dozens of small tally marks, sets of 5 carved deep. I counted them, there were 147. When I looked closer, I noticed the faint outlines of something on the floor, like drag marks leading to the wall. The air smelled faintly of iron. I backed out and shut the door, heart pounding. The next day, I called my mom to ask if she knew anything about it. There was a long pause, then she said quietly, "Your aunt used to play in that room before the accident." I didn't know what she meant. I never had an aunt, at least not one I remembered. She hung up soon after, said she didn't want to talk about it. That night, I nailed the door shut, but the humming didn't stop. Now it comes from inside the walls. And sometimes, when I pass that part of the hallway, I swear I can hear the creak of that rocking chair moving slowly, back and forth, like someone's still sitting there, waiting to finish the lullaby.